funny story. I had an amazing intro planned for this review of Resident Evil 7. A couple days ago, it was midnight, a couple of buddies, and myself. That's not the proper grammar, but we were scouring the city looking for a very creepy house to film in front of to make this intro happen. We found the perfect place. It was super scary. It was creepy. I was like, this is great. And we were about to film until we realized there were a couple homeless people sleeping in the bushes. But most concerningly, there were needles in front of this house that we were filming in front of on the floor. So I think it's safe to say that we didn't feel comfortable filming. So, long story short, no intro for this video, which sucks because I had a really good idea in mind. But I am going to redo this video in a couple months from now, and next time I go to Ohio, because there is a cabin in the middle of the woods, which is like you cannot ask for a better place to film an intro for Resident Evil 7. It's beautiful. So I'm gonna redo it in a few months from now. I'm gonna redo this whole video, but most importantly, the review is about to start. But that's all ready for you guys. So I'm gonna stop talking. Without further ado, this is what I think of Resident Evil 7. Yeah, I'm gonna shut up now. I love you guys. Oh yeah, stay fresh, yeah. Mwah, let's go.
Go tell Andrody. Go tell Andrody. Go tell Andrody that everybody's dead.
This may come as a surprise to some of you, but it's actually been 5 years since the incredibly polarizing Resident Evil 6 was released. With the series stuck in an identity crisis, fans wanted the Resident Evil series just to simply be scary again, and we weren't sure if Capcom knew exactly what we wanted from them. But it turns out that Capcom listened perfectly, because we now have Resident Evil 7, which I'm going to give a low score at the end of this review, simply because this is the only main Resident Evil game that doesn't have a guy say the title of the game using a creepy voice. So, what, 3? 3 out of 10. Yeah, that sounds good. Resident Evil 7 is a perfect reinvention of the series, while also holding on to what made the series so special in the first place close to heart. While I do have some problems with the overall adventure, this is exactly what I wanted. And as a short disclaimer before we start this video, besides the last 90 minutes of the game, I've played the entirety of Resident Evil 7 in VR, and it is without a doubt one of the scariest experiences I've had in my entire life. That's no joke. Now, the only reason I was able to get through the entire adventure in VR is because I have never experienced motion sickness, so I can play VR for hours at a time without my eyes burning and me throwing up all over my headset. And I know this review does look pretty long, even by my standards, but I really want to convince you to get this game if you haven't done so already. As for what the game tries to achieve, this is truly amazing. Our main protagonist, Ethan Bradbury, gets a pretty dark video of his wife, who's been missing for over 3 years, and is supposedly in a seemingly abandoned house in rural Louisiana. So like any slightly loving husband would do, he embarks on a lonely road trip to get his girl back. But then you realize that the place isn't so abandoned, and then the game properly begins. You're in the presence of the Baker family, and it's safe to say that they're kinda messed up. From this point on, it's up to you to escape the house, and not die. Preferably with your wife. After recently beating Resident Evil 7, it's very hard for me not to spoil what this game is truly about, so all you need to know is that this is more than just another version of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The story here is great. The way in which the story unfolds its many secrets is paced perfectly, but these mysteries the game dangles in front of you don't feel cheap or undeserved. The mysteries, as well as their payoffs, feel earned and satisfying. This is also the only Resident Evil game in which I feel contextualizes the absurdity of the situation you're in and the messed up things that the family does. From the places you'll visit to the things you're forced to do, almost everything put in Resi 7 feels justified. Now, I can't think of a better time to talk about the environment in Resident Evil 7, so let's talk about it now. Holy shit, this house and basically everything that surrounds it is one of the most immersive locations in a Resident Evil game. It may never be as iconic as the Spencer Mansion, I don't think anything could be, but in terms of atmosphere, immersion, and surprises, the Baker Mansion is terrifying and equally impactful. Every room has its purpose and has a reason for existing, and the layout of this mansion balances the line of being unpredictable and logical. The environmental storytelling here is by far the best to be seen in a Resident Evil game. This Baker family is absolutely messed up. However, you can still find traces of humanity left in them, as well as getting the sense that this house is truly being lived in. Although I don't understand as to why there are so many toilets, but I'm not complaining. I'm BathroomGamers. I mean, more toilets is good. Playing Resident Evil 7 in VR makes the act of exploring the mansion even more immersive than normal. Wandering through these hallways and exploring these rooms by peeking over boxes and crouching under tables feels so natural and lifelike. I truly felt like I've walked these hallways with my own 2 feet. After exploring the Baker mansion, I felt like I have actually been there. Speaking of the Bakers, let's talk about damn characters. The Baker family as a whole are both likable in execution and supremely terrifying. The way they speak, their actions, the way they interact with you, and the subtle clues the game throws at you make the Baker family some of the most memorable and completely unique villains in the series. The performances of both Jack and Marguerite showcase these characters' eccentric personalities and violent nature, while their son Lucas comes across as completely typical and relatively cliche. But the acting for everyone else in this game as a whole it's meh, it's fine. So here's a big question surrounding the game: how scary is it? There are countless videos on YouTube of Let's Players pretending to get scared when they play horror games, so it is hard to tell when a game is actually scary or when YouTubers are just straight up acting like it is. Now, I don't get scared easily in games. This isn't me trying to show off and be a macho man. It's a disclaimer. You gotta know how scared I am. I don't get scared easily. Similar first-person horror games like Amnesia didn't do anything for me, and I was only scared within the first hour and a half of Outlast until I understood how the game worked. But in short, playing Resident Evil 7 in VR specifically is without a doubt the scariest experience I've had in a video game.
Excuse me? Oh. What the? Oh! Oh, that scared the fuck out of me, actually.
There were countless moments where I literally screamed out loud in absolute horror. The majority of gamers who haven't experienced VR in any shape or form can't imagine how gimmicky the hardware is and how it hinders the overall experience instead of enhancing it. But dear God, that cannot be farther from the truth. I also felt as if I was actually existing in the game. I was the one wandering these dim hallways. I was the one getting food shoved down my throat, and I was the one that had to stare at an enemy that was less than a foot away from me just so I could get a clear shot in. Rarely in any video game have I just stopped and stared at a staircase or any disgusting room, afraid to go inside. But in VR, this happened all the time. But regardless if you play this game in VR or not, Resident Evil 7 is still absolutely terrifying. One of the big reasons for this is because of the game's focus on psychological horror instead of cheap jump scares. Resident Evil 7 is also extremely unpredictable. When the Bakers are wandering through the houses you're trying to explore, they do some crazy things that you cannot expect. They pop in at moments you truly least expect them to, and part of this is because some of what happens in the game happens at random, similar to the PT demo. Running through hallways you've been through multiple times before can sometimes contain a subtle difference, or maybe another enemy entirely that throws you completely off guard. Regardless of whether you play this game normally or in VR, Resident Evil 7 is quite possibly the scariest game in the entire series, and at the very least, it's a more intimate type of horror compared to other games in the franchise. I do want to talk about the problems I have with playing this game in VR, because compared to playing this game normally, there are a few sacrifices and drawbacks. Now, there is a noticeable visual downgrade when playing in VR, which really caught me off guard during my first few minutes with the game, as well as when you have to inspect notes and pictures and can't even comprehend what you're looking at. But once you get used to playing in VR, the graphics almost never bother me or took me out of the experience. But what did take me out of the experience is when the game gets all cinematic. When it comes to animations interacting with the environment, on normal mode, Resident Evil 7 is extremely polished. It's a very cinematic experience when your character interacts with objects, as well as when the game takes over during scripted segments. In VR, however, instead of being all smooth and sexy to presumably avoid sickness, the screen cuts to black, shows you something, and will keep cutting to black. It consistently takes me out of the experience, and although I 100% understand how it can make some people ill, I do wish they added a setting that gave players the option to take out the black screens if they wanted. Overall, VR makes Resident Evil 7 one of the most immersive, terrifying experience I've ever had the pleasure of having, and I without a doubt in my mind recommend it as the optimal way to play this game. But it just sucks that even the majority of people that have PSVR just don't have the stomach to enjoy it. A lot of fans were nervous when they learned that Resident Evil 7 was gonna be in first person, which is a first for main entries in the series. Instead of taking full inspiration from modern horror games like Amnesia, Outlast, or PT, this absolutely feels like a Resident Evil game. Resident Evil 7 is the most similar to the original game than any other entry. You have a mansion to explore, limited ammo, resources and inventory slots, multiple safe rooms where nobody can touch you, and backtracking that doesn't feel like padding. During the first half of the game, you have almost nothing to defend yourself with, a cute little knife and eventually a pistol that is about as effective as throwing writs at an enemy. And with the indestructible Baker family roaming around the house, I was afraid that this would be a boring stealth game where you would spend the majority of your time playing the game standing in a corner waiting. But fortunately, that's not the case, as the main rule for avoiding contact is if they don't see you, they don't know you're there. But when it's time to fight, it gets incredibly nerve-wracking. The main enemies you'll be fighting throughout the game are these creatures called the Molded, which, as frightening as they initially are, do become predictable in their attack patterns later on in the game. But for the first few hours, holy shit, these things are a nightmare to deal with. Even with powerful weapons found later in the game, fighting these things will always be a stressful endeavor as you have very limited resources. Like in every single Resident Evil game, no matter how powerful you may feel, the odds are always stacked against you. I won't spoil how crazy it gets later on in the game, but even with these powerful weapons, you will never feel comfortable. But as for the rest of the gameplay, searching the environment for secrets is a lot of fun. Messing with your inventory wasn't terrible, it was actually implemented very well. Besides the final boss battle, the boss battles are varied and incredibly tense. The puzzles for the most part are insultingly easy, although there were a few parts of the game where I actually had no idea what to do next, especially near the end. When it comes to actual gameplay, Resident Evil 7 is the most enjoyable first-person horror game to actually play. The game took me around 10 hours to complete. Replay value consists of playing this game on a harder difficulty mode, which I absolutely recommend, and telling you why would actually be a spoiler, so just take my word for it. There seems to be a lot of DLC planned for Resident Evil 7, and if you enjoyed the game like I have, I think it's a safe bet to buy the Season's Pass so you can enjoy every fright this game has to offer in the future. Resident Evil 7 is exactly what this series has needed. This is a slow, focused horror experience that is one of the scariest games I've ever played. No matter what happens though, even when you think you have what it takes to get through, you'll never be safe. Resident Evil 7 perfectly understands what makes the series so great in the first place, while simultaneously reinventing the series. The setting and atmosphere are thick with fear, the characters and enemies are for the most part unique and intriguing, and the actual gameplay is tight and stressful. Oh, and the last few hours of this game are completely different from the rest of the game, and it's amazing. Now, while I do have issues with the lack of other enemies to be up against, as well as wishing there was more variety when it comes to approaching combat, this is a confident horror game that sticks to its strengths and proves that the Resident Evil series will always stand relevant in gaming, and while it may have its mishaps, the series proves that it's the best in the genre. Playing this game in VR was one of the most memorable experiences I've had with the game this generation so far. So, if you have PlayStation VR, you have to get this game. If you're a giant fan of the Resident Evil series like I am, you have to get this game. If you have never played a Resident Evil game before and would like to take part in an experience that will corrupt your nightmares, you have to get this game. Resident Evil 7 receives, that was very lame, but it still receives, a 9.25 out of 10. So that is what I think of Resident Evil 7. If you played this game already, let me know what you think of it, and if you're considering on picking this game up and have any questions, ask away in the comments below. For more videos on the Resident Evil series or anything about bathrooms and stupid, I don't know, if you want to see videos of like just the dumbest things, then welcome to BathroomGamers. Thank you for watching, and stay fresh.